Okay, so we're going to do this in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hola, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hippies and straights around the world. This is your old friend Dr. Woody, bringing you another installment of As the Cookie Crumbles. And today, in the aftermath of Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about the ghosts of Greenwood. What could probably have been the worst, bloodiest, deadliest, and most destructive race riot in American history occurred in 1921 in the black neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Greenwood. I was reminded of it when, by a twist of coincidence, this poster was floated around on Facebook the other day. I taught in Oklahoma, mid-90s, and learned of Greenwood while I was living there. What was interesting to me was that very few people, either inside or outside of the Sooner State, were conscious of it then, and probably still, I suspect. The Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma was home, at the time, to the most prosperous community of black Americans anywhere in the country, then or possibly ever. It was affluent, with nice homes and progressive, prosperous businesses and growing families and lots of prospects. It was known as the Black Wall Street, and it was totally obliterated, razed to the ground in just about 16 hours between the afternoon of May 31st, 1921 and noon the next day, July 1st, 1921, by white rioters who, with the support and material assistance of the Oklahoma state government, proclaimed they were suppressing a black rebellion driven by careless, inciting editorials in the city's white press. Thousands of whites marauded all over Greenwood, killing, burning, and raping black citizens across a 50-block urban area. On Sunday morning, at the height of the violence, the governor of Oklahoma sent military aircraft over the district, and the planes dropped incendiary bombs on the population. An estimated 10,000 white Tulsans rioted on, as usual, the flimsy pretexts, mainly that a black boy had assaulted a white damsel in an elevator in a business building. Whites lynched the alleged offender, then the black community objected forcibly, and the mob turned on those envied and successful black people. In less than a day, the Greenwood district in Tulsa, the wealthiest black community in the entire country, simply ceased to exist. The era immediately after World War I was one fraught with racial conflagrations all across the country. In the South, there was Longview, Texas. The North, though most people don't remember it, was riddled with incidents: Chicago, Duluth, Omaha, as well as in the border states such as Oklahoma. Anti-black racial violence was not an unusual problem. It was indeed commonplace at the time. What made Greenwood worse than many was the fact that black people resisted. Hence, the extent of the damage, death, and destruction probably were amplified. There were a pretty fair number of World War I veterans among the population in Greenwood, and when the calls for lynchings started, these men armed themselves and put on their old uniforms and stood up to the whites, which, of course, further enraged and infuriated the already rabid white rabble-rousers. Along with the killings and beatings and other brutalities, thousands of innocent blacks, now to remind you, these folks are American citizens, were rounded up and warehoused for days in filthy, toxic, primitive conditions. Nobody has anything like an accurate count of the number of victims blacks killed. There is a lingering rumor of mass graves in the neighborhood. Locals estimated that as many as 300 black Tulsans were murdered by the mobs. The Army was hauling away bodies in freight cars, according to local sources at the time, and the official death toll, though, was 36. 26 blacks and 10 whites. The district and Tulsa's black community never fully recovered. The event pretty much lay dormant in the memories of the majority of Oklahoma's population for almost 80 years until near the end of the 20th century. America's most famous eminent black historian, John Hope Franklin, a native of the area whose family had been made homeless by the riots, began to agitate for justice then. A commission was established, and in 2001 it returned recommendations and findings, including the recommendation for reparations. The report recommended that direct payment of reparations to persons survivors of the 21 riots be paid, that direct payment of reparation to descendants of the survivors be paid, a scholarship fund should be established with students affected by the Tulsa race riot, establishment of an economic development zone in the area should be forwarded, and a memorial for the reburial of the remains of the victims of the Tulsa race riot was supposed to be established. The Tulsa Reparations Committee, sponsored by the Center for Racial Justice, was formed on April 7th, 2001, to obtain restitution. In June of 2001, the Oklahoma State Legislature passed the 1921 Race Riot Reconciliation Act, while falling short of the Commission's recommendations. That is to say, of course, there were no reparations in the bill. It provided for 300 scholarships and the creation of a memorial for those who died, which was dedicated in 2010, and an economic development plan for Greenwood. That was it. In 2010 and again in 2012, the John Hope Franklin Tulsa Greenwood Race Riot Claims Accountability Act was introduced in the U.S. Congress, but no legislative action has yet been taken, and the ghosts of Greenwood, who were unjustly vilified and blamed in the aftermath of the riots, of which they were unquestionable victims, and their descendants, are still awaiting some semblance of restorative justice more than 90 years later. WikiLeaks has a very dry but compelling account of the events. It's all the more colorful, or more powerful, that is, for being basically non-judgmental and pretty monochromatic. I taught at a very large university in Oklahoma between 1994 and 2000. I was in a teacher education program. During that period, I met only one native Oklahoman who admitted to having any knowledge of the events in Tulsa in 1921. He was a high school history teacher, and he said his grandfather had been part of the riots, and he got a reprimand from his principal for trying to teach about it. The reprimand? For using unapproved curriculum materials. What you really have here, I think, is a project for Denzel Washington or Morgan Freeman, a blockbuster of historical significance, as well as a love story, a kind of black, landlocked Titanic with a social message. Greenwood Under Siege, anyone? A sort of World War II Jewish ghetto Renaissance resistance movie, but not set in Warsaw, only to be revealed at the end, while the district burns and the heroes perish, that it's Oklahoma 1921, and all the attackers were good old Americans. Pause, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you at the beach.